I am about to start the forum, and dear participants, with your permission, we are starting our work today. It is the third forum on global social transformations held on the initiative of the Faculty of Global Processes of the Lomonosov Moscow State University and the UNESCO Chair on Global Problems and Emerging Social and Ethical
I am very happy. I am very happy with the UNESCO's chair, you know, because I started the UNESCO's chairs in the year.
Yes, it was your invention. It was great, really.
Yes. And look, when do you like that I speak or I say so? Now? When?
I would like to announce the following. We shall open the forum now. There will be greeting from our dean, who will personally join us a little later. He is taking part now in the academic council approving new doctorates. But there is his greeting at the moment. Then there are greetings from one of the top UN officials, General Director of UN office in Geneva. Then we hope to have Mrs. Ramos, the Assistant Director General of UNESCO for Social and Human Sciences. And after that, there will be a presentation of some preliminary thoughts on what will be the limits of growth in the 21st century. It is now under elaboration by the team of scientists of the Moscow State University. And before the presentation, I would like to invite you to tell us some thoughts on the topic of our meeting today, dear Federico,
very well.
if you agree.
Very well, very well, very well. So, I am delighted. I am delighted.
Thank you so much. And
I am delighted to come back to the chair, to the Moscow University, and to the Club of Rome. I am delighted with this. Well, I have been talking with Garry Jacobs. Garry Jacobs is a fantastic personality as well.
Yes, I share this view. And with this, we open the third forum. This is the third. The first one we organized in May 2020. The second was in December in 2020. And the third is the first forum which is included in the official plan of action of UNESCO as the UNESCO event. And we devoted it to the very important topic of global social transformations. And this time we were trying to see what is actually the idea of the limits of growth now, 50 years.
Yes.
50 years after the famous report. So that I declare the forum open, and I would invite to show the presentation and welcoming words by the dean.
Дорогие участники форума, для меня большая честь и огромное удовольствие приветствовать вас на заседании третьего Международного научного форума «Глобальные социальные трансформации и пределы роста в 21 веке», который проводится в формате онлайн из-за известных событий, связанных с пандемией коронавируса. Конечно же, очень хочется наконец-то встретиться лично. И я надеюсь на то, что следующий форум пройдет уже очно, быть может, в Москве, и мы сможем друг друга тепло обнять, поприветствовать и наконец-то обменяться не только своими идейными предложениями, но и неформально пообщаться. Мы благодарны, очень благодарны за поддержку нашего мероприятия генеральному директору Женевского отделения ООН госпоже Татьяне Воловой, заместителю генерального директора ЮНЕСКО по социальным и гуманитарным наукам госпоже Габриэле Рамос. Особая благодарность знаменитому легендарному профессору Федерико Майору, который в свою бытность генеральным директором ЮНЕСКО инициировал программу МОСТ – менеджмент управления социальными трансформациями. Вообще, вот этот формат для нас очень значим. Он объединяет ЮНЕСКО, Всемирной академией искусства и науки, с Римским Клубом. И вот совместно мы проводим уже третий форум, посвященный актуальнейшей теме – глобальной социальной трансформации. В этот раз мы особо акцентировали внимание на тематику, которую, собственно говоря, почти полвека назад инициировал Римский Клуб, выпустив в 1972 году знаменитый доклад «Пределы роста». Ведь именно он разбудил человечество, побудил задуматься над тем, как жить, как выжить, как развиваться дальше. Ученые Московского университета во главе с нашим ректором, академиком Виктором Антоновичем Садовничем, кстати, в недавнем прошлом тоже член Римского клуба, решили взглянуть на ситуацию с позиции нашего времени, подготовить доклад о пределах роста в наступившем 21 веке. И мы знаем, что такая же работа проводится и у наших коллег. И, конечно же, сегодняшние события и знакомство с первыми результатами этой работы – это чрезвычайно важное, может быть, исторического масштаба события в развитии современной науки. Наш факультет, факультет глобальных процессов Московского университета, его кафедра ЮНЕСКО по изучению глобальных проблем в течение последних 10 лет принимают самое активное участие в программе ЮНЕСКО «МОСТ» – управление социальными трансформациями. Мы тесно сотрудничаем вместе с доктором Кроули, который представляет секретариат ЮНЕСКО этой программы, и очень признательны ему за проведение школ ЮНЕСКО, за неизменную поддержку и внимание к нашему международному научному конгрессу «Глобалистика». Джон Кроули завершает свою работу в ЮНЕСКО, но я уверен, что у нас впереди еще много встреч, совместных проектов, и мы искренне желаем, кстати, академику Международной академии глобальных исследований, доктору Джону Кроули, новых больших успехов, и будем всегда рады видеть его на совместных мероприятиях, в том числе в стенах Московского университета. Мы очень рады тому, что у нас успешно развивается сотрудничество с Всемирной академией искусства и науки. Эта академия создана более 60 лет назад и была инициирована такими выдающимися умами человечества, как Альберт Эйнштейн, Бертран Рассел, Роберт Оппенгеймер. Кстати, в свое время они остро ощущали ответственность ученого за применение результатов его научных открытий, переживали. Мы благодарны президенту Академии, ныне действующему Гарри Джейкобсу, за его преданность высоким традициям научной дипломатии во имя сохранения мира, выживания человеческого общества, и вот за ту необъятную энергию, которую он тратит на мобилизацию усилий ученых разных стран для поиска ответа на все новые и новые глобальные вызовы, стоящие перед человеческой цивилизацией. Московский университет, который стал местом проведения первого заседания Римского клуба в России в 2000 году, активно поддержал развитие научного сотрудничества с этой уникальной организацией, членами которой были профессор Московского университета Джемен Гвишани, который был другом и соратником Аурелия Пичей, основателя Римского клуба, профессор университета Ильи Пригожина, Нобелевского лауреата, основателя Института математических исследований сложных систем, которые они создавали вместе с академиком Садовничем, Сергей Капица, автор одного из докладов Римского клуба, выдающийся популяризатор науки и крупнейший специалист в области глобальных демографических проблем. Поэтому с особым чувством разрешите поприветствовать сопредседателей клуба, Мампели Рампели и Сандрин Диксон Деклёв, а также нашего большого друга и соратника, исполнительного директора клуба Карлоса Альвареса Перейра, согласившегося быть не только участником нашего мероприятия, но одним из модераторов нашего форума. Сегодня к участникам форума присоединились члены недавно созданной глобальной коалиции науки за устойчивое развитие, Bridges, учреждение которой мы активно поддержали на сессиях Бюро Межправительственного совета ЮНЕСКО по программе «Мост». Мы приветствуем их и надеемся на совместное участие в научных проектах и мероприятиях. Нам предстоят сегодня интереснейшие дискуссии, содержательный обмен мнениями по актуальным глобальным проблемам современности. Желаю вам, дорогие друзья, успешной работы, крепкого здоровья и новых успехов. И от имени всех организаторов нашего мероприятия сердечно благодарю, что вы приняли приглашение и стали участниками форума. Надеюсь, что итоги нашей работы, нашего форума позволят значительно расширить понимание задач глобального и регионального развития в этот нелегкий, драматический период в истории человечества, период смены технологических укладов, политических и экономических обострений и кризисов, наконец, глобальной пандемии. Уверен, вместе, объединив усилия, мы поможем всему миру, нашим странам преодолеть новые глобальные вызовы. Доброго нам пути, новых успехов. Спасибо за внимание.
Хотел бы поблагодарить. I would like to thank Professor Ilyin, and it gives me a special pleasure to present to your attention the greetings to the participants of the forum from one of the highest officials of the United Nations Organization, the Director General of the UN Office in Geneva, Her Excellency Mrs. Tatiana Volovaya.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, it is my great pleasure to address you today at this online forum on global social transformation. I wish to begin by thanking Moscow State University and personally its rector, Viktor Antonovich Sadovnichiy, for organizing today's forum and for leading a thorough scientific international discussion on such a pivotal issue. The topic of global social transformation is highly relevant as the multilateral system is currently facing its deepest crisis since the Second World War. The existing global governance system has gradually become deregulated and fragmented. Even before the coronavirus pandemic, progress towards sustainable development had been virtually off track. COVID-19 has laid bare the world's many fragilities, such as rampant inequalities in income and opportunities, climate crisis, and rising number of hotbeds of conflict in various parts of the world. In January 2020, 1 month before the COVID-19 pandemic galloped across the globe, the UN Secretary General Guterres identified 4 global threats that endanger our common future, metaphorically naming them the 4 horsemen. First, the highest geopolitical tension in years. Second, an existential climate crisis. Third, deep and growing global mistrust. And fourth, the dark side of the technological progress. I would add one more horseman to this list, and that is inequality. Take the example of the global access to vaccination. As we speak, more than 2 billion vaccine doses have been administered worldwide, equal to 26 doses for every 100 people. However, 85% of shots have been administered in high and upper middle income countries. Only 0.3% of doses have been administered in low income densely populated countries. Or let us take another example of digital technologies, which helped many of us to adjust to new ways of working during the pandemic. However, we should not forget that our 46%, almost half of the world population, still does not have access to the internet. Beyond the issue of access, the digital divide is also about a gap in skills and learning opportunities. If left unaddressed, the digital divide between underconnected and hyper-digitalized countries will widen, therefore exacerbating existing inequalities. The COVID-19 pandemic is a stark reminder of how interdependent our world is and how vulnerable our civilization is to such global disasters. The most important lesson we must learn from this crisis is that global challenges require coordinated multilateral responses, and that in the face of emergencies like this, no one will be safe until everybody is safe. To face current challenges, we need more effective multilateralism with vision, ambition, and impact. The 21st century multilateralism must be networked and inclusive, drawing on the experience and expertise of different international institutions and organizations, civil society, cities, businesses, local authorities, young people, academia, and think tanks. Building a reinforced multilateralism was one of the 10 priorities of the United Nations Secretary General identified for the UN for 2021. It is extremely important that scientific and research institutions take an active part in forging this new multilateralism and proposing innovative solutions based on research and data analysis. I would like to remind you how in 1972 the Club of Rome published its famous report on the limits in growth, which presented the findings of an international team of researchers about the limits of the global ecosystem. Using computer modeling, scientists concluded that our planet cannot support present rate of economic and population growth much longer than the year 2100. Time has proven the validity of their point. We all understand now that sustainable development is the only way to change the pessimistic, even apocalyptic prospect for the future of humankind. We need the kind of sustainable development that takes into account the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Today's forum provides an excellent opportunity to listen to what scientists think about the future of our planet and what we should do together in order to make peace with nature and to embark on the path towards sustainable development. I wish you all very interesting and deep discussions. Thank you very much.
Let me thank Mrs. Tatiana Volovaya for this kind address, and we are very grateful to the UNESCO Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences, Mrs. Gabriela Ramos, who kindly accepted the invitation to address the forum. For us, it is not only very honorable, but also inspiring in further increase our efforts for MOST and UNESCO that we permanently develop, especially since the establishment of our UNESCO chair in 2010. We welcome you at the forum, dear Ms. Ramos, and ask you kindly to take the floor.
Thank you so much, Professor Sayamov, and it's a great pleasure to be with all of you, with the distinguished participants, Dr. Sadov Nishi, Professor Ilin. I recognize Dr. Mayor. Thank you for creating MOST. That was visionary. and of course our friend Luis Ostepec, John Kроули, and all of the friends. I'm really pleased to welcome you to this third edition of the International Scientific Forum on Global Social Transformation that has been dedicated this time to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Limits to Growth. We have heard it already, this influential study that was commissioned by the Club of Rome, of which findings were first presented at international events in Moscow and Rio de Janeiro in the summer of 1971. It's just impressive how timely the message still is, and it's impressive that we are in a context where we did not only make progress. I think that we're coming out of the pandemic, but the impact of the pandemic in human development is going to be huge. We are losing decades of health gains, of development gains, of poverty gains, or learning gains. And the fact is we don't know what is going to be the real invoice that this crisis is going to leave with us and to the future generations that actually are also suffering from this impact. It's timely, the debate also, because in UNESCO we need to redefine or to search for a renewed strategy of the management of social transformation program. This is a preparation of new strategy for the period 2022-2029. And I feel that your inputs, your insights, the kind of reflections that you can bring together will help us greatly in terms of defining where this this program can have impact, and how we can develop a new way of economic growth and economic progress and social transformations. We look forward to your
I think there is a small technical problem. Hopefully it will be restored. But otherwise, everyone has the connection. Yes, do you hear me well?
Yes, yes.
Yes,
Means,
Sorry.
we hear you. We hear
I
you.
think I got caught.
You did indeed.
Yeah.
Should I continue or should I stop, or you tell me what to do?
oh, we're waiting for you impatiently.
I'm very sorry. I don't know why this thing happened, but I was posing this question of how are we going to really address the question of the challenges that this pandemic is delivering to us.
They asked if I had a fever, and I think that was a no, right?
Could we mute our mics to have just one voice, please? Fostering international development in the post-pandemic world requires advancing innovative thinking and action along three main lines that we are looking at UNESCO. The first one is, how do we enhance the capacities of governments to deliver? It was really something that fell short, even in the most advanced economies, not having a health system that could resist the kind of shock provided by the pandemic. How do we build the capacity of our societies to resist and bounce back? The resilience of our societies, the cohesion of our societies that has really been harmed by the pandemic and the very unequal distribution of its impacts, but also by what was mentioned before, the question of economics, of inequalities. And how the capacity of our economies to simultaneously deliver quality, efficiency, equality, and sustainability, and how do we live together with the environment, which was something that the Club of Rome had been so strong in so many ways. And so the point of departure, it should be the recognition that we have very good lessons, very strong lessons from the current crisis. First, that we were badly prepared, and I think that we need to recognize that. Second, that the more vulnerable populations were the hardest hits. The poor, the women, youth, elderly, ethnic and indigenous population, and persons with disability. But I would add the middle class. The middle class was neither with any kind of insurance to waive the impact of the pandemic. Inequality has been the mainstay of the crisis. The pandemic has exposed the vulnerabilities related to a very skewed distribution of income and opportunities that played a role in the intensification of the crisis. And furthermore, the pandemic aggravated existing inequalities and created new ones. And solutions to the pandemic also show, for example, it was mentioned before, the inequalities on the vaccine distribution. And this is something that UNESCO has also come out to make a call to treat vaccines as a global public good. And in all these very impressive set of issues, we need to understand also how they are interrelated. How inequality of income is interrelated with educational outcomes and with health outcomes. We now know that 81%, 82% of health outcomes are not related to the health systems, but to other socioeconomic conditions. And therefore, we need a better understanding of the social complexity and the major trends in the sense of demographics, the major trends in terms of digital, the major trends in terms of the climate shock. So this interconnectedness of our societies and our systems, health, economic, education, environment, as I said, need to be better grasped, better modeled, better understood to define better policies when we go out from this situation. And we need to have a more integrative approach to understand not only how one system behaves, but how it goes about with the other systems and its interaction. And this forum on the global societal transformation and the limits of growth in the 21st century, it's very appropriate for this. What are the questions that I would like to pose? How the social and human sciences are going to be maximizing the contributions that can make with this reflection and the decisions that we need to take. How to ensure a solid recovery? What is going to be the impact of more advanced economies that were able to put huge fiscal packages while the rest of the world couldn't do it, and therefore the recovery is going to be highly unequal? What is going to be the outcome of this uneven vaccination process? What is going to be the impact of the health, economic, and social crisis in the long term on the SDGs? And then, as I said, given the inequalities, how do we make equity, not an afterthought, not an ex post policy priority, but an ex ante in the economic decisions that we take? And how do we go about redefining the social contract? This has been said by Secretary Guterres, but if we don't go with that very impressive and ambitious vision, how do we rethink the social protection systems? And so these are questions that I want to pose here, and that I hope that in the discussions we can have some conclusions. The MOS program has been contributing to all these angles, will continue to contribute. We had this European Humanities Conference that was really delivering very interesting answers. we launched the Bridges program, which is a coalition of the humanities on climate change. And we also launched another very interesting angle of our work, which is the digital anthropology, that will contribute to another effort that we're having in UNESCO, which is the recommendations of ethics of artificial intelligence. So I feel those are the questions. I have not provided good answers. Maybe the answer is that we need to change course. That's the answer. I think that the development model, the growth model that we have followed, focusing on GDP, focusing on averages, focusing on material well-being as a proxy for progress, needs to change. And needs to change if we want to make it resilient and if we want to make it sustainable. And that's why I'm so glad to be with you, because I'm sure we're going to be delivering some good lessons, outcomes, so that we could also integrate in our own thinking and advance the development of a more meaningful agenda. So thank you so much. Thank you to our great professors and the Lomonosov Moscow State University. We're really pleased to partner with you in all of this.
Thank you so much, dear Ms. Ramos, for your kind words and for your questions, which we shall try in the discussion at least to search for answers. And I hope that the forum will be useful for implementing UNESCO goals and priorities, and that it will be continued as UNESCO most event. And it is only natural, and I am especially happy to welcome at the forum the great Professor Federica Mayor, who contributed a lot to the development of UNESCO as the Director General, and I had a chance to work by that time with Professor Mayor. His footprint, I would say, in UNESCO and in the intellectual heritage of humanity is immense, and I am proud that Professor Mayor accepted our invitation and is with us. Dear Professor, we ask you kindly to address the forum.
Professor Yuri Sayamov, for me is a great pleasure, really, to have this opportunity. Through Augusto Forti, you have contacted me, and I have been very pleased to have again contact with you. I remember very well when we were working all together in UNESCO. This is a very important forum because it's the Moscow State University, because it's the World Academy of Art and Science. You know, it's very relevant, the organization. And we have today here the pleasure to have with us Professor Garry Jacobs, one of the leaders for this transformation of the world that we need. And we have also the Club of Rome. And well, UNESCO, you can imagine that I like very much UNESCO. By the way, UNESCO already in the year 1947 created already the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. I mean, already so many years ago, we had already put in this union for the conservation of nature. And then the Hydrological International Program and the Geological International Program and the Oceanographic Commission. This is very important for me. Oceans. The oceans are the 2/3 of the skin of the earth. We must be very respectful with the ocean and what is happening with the oceans. And then, as you know, at the year 72, the Club of Rome, Aurelio Pecei, I remember very well. Visciani has been mentioned, and I remember very well both of them. And we were working all together as well in order to have the limits to growth already in the century, in the past century. And they said, we must have a limit to growth, and we must take into account the consequences of the markets only solutions in order to have a sustainable development assured. And Academy of Science of the United States of North America in the year 1979 also said, we must today be aware that the emissions of CO2 are growing, but at the same time, the reuptake capacity of the oceans is decreasing because we are affecting the phytoplankton of the oceans. That, as you know, is the best way to reuptake the carbonic anhydride. Well, I say all these things in order only to say that always, the answer has been no. We have not been never listened by all these organizations that were only thinking in the economic aspects of growth, not in the other consequences of growth. And in the year 1992, I remember Maurice Strong, what another personality. With Maurice Strong, we had the summit of the earth, we said, in Rio de Janeiro. And we said, no, now yes, now we will be heard. But you know, the plutocratic groups, the neoliberal plutocratic groups created by Reagan at the end of the 80s were already active. And we had a neoliberal globalization. And first we had the G6, after the G7, after the G8, after the G20. And all these groups are plutocratic. The only things that they know is how to grow and to have good business. And the GNP, this is the only thing that they know. Therefore, I must tell you that the results of the first Earth Summit were very bad. And then we had in Johannesburg in the year 2002, 10 years later, we had another summit of the Earth. Nothing happened again. And finally, we were very lucky because in the United States was a president that was not Republican, but a Democratic president, was Barack Obama. And then, yes, with Barack Obama, we were able, in the year 2015, 6 years ago, we were able to have the agreements of Paris on climate change. And this is very important because this goes very well with this meeting, because they had one resolution in the General Assembly of the United Nations that was called the resolution to transform the world. This is very important now to know in this forum, because what we must do in this forum is just to say, we had already in 2015 United Nations resolutions to transform the world. And they said, we have now the Agenda 2030, as we have the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And at this moment, I must tell you, I had a kind of hope. I said, well, now, for the first time, now we will be heard for the first time, because in the year 1997, we had already in UNESCO a declaration on intergenerational responsibilities. I think that this is today the most important thing that we must take into account. We must act now, and very urgent action. Why? Because for the first time in history, we are facing global irreversible threats. Global irreversible threats. I repeat this because I am a specialist in irreversible pathological processes. And more than 60 years ago, I was already working to avoid in the newborn some metabolic diseases that if you treat this metabolic disease, the child is completely normal. But if not, there is no point of return. And then now we must take this in our mind and say, now is the moment. We must be heard now. And why I am I consider that one meeting like this today in Moscow is so important, because the Moscow State University, the World Academy, the Club of Rome, the UNESCO, all of them are going to say, and this must be very strong and very, very urgent call. We must say to the world, now we are facing irreversible processes. And we must look at the eyes of our children and of our grandchildren and to say, no, do not be, because we are going in this occasion, we are going to act. Now is very, very important. And the very distinguished lady at the front of the Geneva UN has said in her words, now we have one solution only, multilateralism. We have the solution to take out the governance of the plutocratic group and of all this, and to be a multilateral union at the worldwide level in order to face the problems that we have today. And it's for this that I have a lot of confidence in the results of this meeting, Professor, because I think that in this occasion, yes, in this occasion, now with Biden in the White House and with the authorities of Russia and of China, all of them are aware that for the first time in history, the planet is facing irreversible threats. And I am sure that they will be able to have a world pact to transform the world.
Thank you so much, dear Professor. I think that your words provoke a lot of thoughts and a lot of really a necessity to think over what we are doing and what we are heading for. And with this, I would like to invite some people present here who also wanted to address our meeting. And I would like to invite Professor Louis Osterbeck, who is the president of the World Council for Philosophy and Social Sciences. Dr. Osterbeck, please.
Much, Professor Sayamov. I hope you are hearing me. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, let me congratulate and thank for the invitation. I also greet all the colleagues, particularly Gabriela Ramos, John Krouli, with whom we've been working on various projects recently. And of course, the World Academy of Arts and Sciences. Let me be very brief, but basically let you know that, of course, we agree with the substance of what has been said so far. We understand that we face today, for the first time in history, and regardless of the magnitude of the challenge we consider to exist, it is the first time that the humans face a common challenge. This has never happened before in history, or at least it has never happened in a context in which humans could understand that it was a common challenge. Because of course, in the past, with glaciations and so on, there were also very disturbing challenges, but there was no awareness of the situation and no means of intervening in it. So we have this awareness, and this has an immediate implication. All the strategies of humans in the past to face challenges were ultimately ethnocentric. There is historically a growing dimension of what is the ethnos. So in fact, of course, the scale of the identities of groups has grown with civilizations, namely. But never in the past, there was a situation in which any attempt to face the challenges alone is condemned to fail. So this has tremendous implications, because one core characteristic of human cultures, it's their diversity. It's not only a characteristic, but it's a strength. The possibility to look for different avenues, to have different understandings, is not a weakness, it's a strength. The trick today is how can we combine the need to act as one species, embedded in one imbricated set of ecosystems, keeping our diversity. And this, of course, relates to a responsibility to understand the echoes of this in different communities. Sustainability is perceived, we can understand, by almost everyone on the planet, but it's not necessarily understood exactly the same way. There are many reasons for that. I mentioned one, which is cultural traditions, but part of this is language diversity. For example, and I repeat this over and over, when we talk about sustainability, we are not talking exactly about the same thing as when we use the word durabilité, just to use the two core languages within the UN system. It's similar, but it's not the same thing. So how do we intervene in that? I think we are making some progresses, and I think the pandemic has accelerated the reflection in society about this situation. The interpretations might be different, but what is a common trend is that there is a reflection. And when we look, for example, to attitudes of people and what they are looking for in the response to the pandemic, for example, if you ask booksellers, they will say to you that top sold books relate to the history of epidemics, to literature related to that, to philosophical studies on that. And this shows that people are interested in framing their anxieties within wider scales, comparative scales. So they are looking for solutions, of course. We need solutions. We know that we need technical solutions, that there is a growing understanding that the technical solutions, although important, will not overcome the more deep concerns that we have. Gabriela Ramos, in her intervention, spoke a lot about economics, and I think she's right. I think this is a core issue. And one of the problems we have is that we have reduced the economics to GRP and to a standard way of playing the economic life, forgetting about the basic fact that economy is about building a bridge between providing whatever to the needs that people have. And there is a growing divide between what is offered and the needs. As we can see, there is a growing divide between institutions in general and people. One interesting indicator is that the very few studies that have been conducted in the last year or so about how people and institutions foresee the future in the next 10, 15, 20 years demonstrate that whereas institutions in general perceive it with a very strong anxiety, and at least in the first years with a severe pessimism, they talk basically about the loss of the economy, the disruption of institutions and the framework and so on. People, to the surprise of many and to my surprise, I must say, they tend to have a very positive, a very optimist expectation. One possible interpretation of this is that people are adapting faster than institutions. And whereas institutions are still looking for solutions within the old framework, see, for example, how the discussion on resuming tourism is evolving, which is largely quantitative, and to a certain extent, how interesting proposals like the Green Deal, the energetic issue, which is of course a priority, are being tackled. although they are good, they are still being tackled within the old mindset. But I would argue that people are changing. How exactly, I don't know, but they are changing. And we have to be attentive to that, and we have to build, again, a bridge between that and leadership, between that and academic reasoning. I think we have today some tools, some new tools that we can use. One has been already mentioned here, which is Bridges. And if we look at the program Bridges, which has been approved very fast by the Intergovernmental Panel, and this is a very positive sign of the capacity of reaction of an institution like UNESCO. I would say Bridges in the end is about transforming territories. It's about building a new understanding of sustainability, which combines top-down initiatives which are needed with bottom-up processes. And of course, the bottom-up processes, if they are confederated, they will have a severe positive impact in governance and resilience. And I think Bridges is about that. We have another tool, which is the Lisbon Declaration, coming from the European Humanities Conference earlier in May. This declaration, in the end, proposes something which seems to be very simple. It is actually very simple, but it is very powerful. When it states that all universities should, at all levels of education, but particularly universities up to the PhD level, including the PhD level, should have a unit credits teaching about the integration between humanities and science. This is what I would argue to be a transformative tool in terms of leadership.
I can listen on the phone.
And I think if we intervene on that, in 10 years' time, our future young leaders will no longer perceive humanities and science as being separate dimensions, and society as a whole. So I think the combination of these two tools is fundamental. Bridges acting on territories, and the Declaration of Lisbon acting at the top level in educating leadership. And then we have something more recent, which is the ÜNESCO Declaration, which has a very important implication of the World Academy of Arts and Sciences, and is also supported by CIPS, which I would read as transforming the reasoning and the epistemological framework. So if we combine these three, we actually can intervene in our capacity to actually change the platform in which the game is played. So I think related to this, we have, of course, a large number of other challenges. But I do think that if we concentrate in some, and if they are strong enough, as I think these are, we can achieve results and we can achieve convergence. And this is very important. We need tools that within the cultural and ideological diversity that exists in the planet, and we hope should continue to exist. It is, I repeat it again, a major strength of humans. We need to have tools that can be used with flexibility within this diversity. And this will bring us to convergence. This is the contribution of CIPS together with all of you. And so thank you again, Professor Sayamov, for the invitation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Osterbeck. Thank you very much. And we have another short address by the president of the Institute of Advanced Studies, Professor Constantinescu, who used to be the president of Romania for a period of time. Professor Constantinescu, are you here?
Thank you. Esteemed guests, I'm glad to meet you all again on the occasion of this online forum dedicated to global transformations. I congratulate you for organizing this event at this particular moment when the aggressive rhythm of the pandemic seems to have slowed down. And we must think of the future, because as our friend Professor Crouli from Trento University stated, the anticipation of the future needs to be a part of the present decisions. The most striking conclusion of the economic events of the pandemic bearing social implication was a discrepancy between the impoverishment of the population at the same time as the increase in wealth of the world's billionaires. The list compiled by Forbes magazine on April 17th, 2021 comprises 2,755 billionaires with 493 new billionaires this year only, one every 17 hours on average. According to the Oxfam report, the inequality virus of January 21st, 2021, the combined wealth of the 10 richest people in the world, increasing during the pandemic by $540 billion. It only took 9 months for the wealth of the first 1,000 billionaires to come back to their maximum from before the pandemic. While for the poorest part of the world, the recovery might take longer than a decade. I would also like to mention the recent reaction of the leaders of the main 7 economic powers of the world, who upon their meeting of the CoR summit of June 11th, 30th, decided to support the proposal made by President Joe Biden on an agreement on the establishment of the global tax of the least 15th for multinational corporations to counter their resort to fiscal paradises with extremely low taxation levels or exception from taxation. Almost a decade ago, I received from Graham Maxton the book titled The End of Progress: How Modern Economics Has Failed Us. The question that Graham Maxton attempts to answer is how can we offer compassion, kindness, equal access to opportunities to a large number of the people, at the same time as protecting the world for the future generation. The question that Maxton raises as a representative of the Western world holds a special moral significance to me. In the first decades after the fall of communist dictatorship of Eastern Europe, which were fundamented on a state-managed economy, I fought for 6 years as a civic leader and for 4 years as a head of state for a radical change to a democratic state, the rule of law, and the free market economy. Today, after 30 years, I am profoundly disappointed. As I discussed with Francis Fukuyama in 1998 in Harvard and in 2014 in Gdansk, the last decade of the past century was not the end of history. And the first decades of the 21st century are disappointing not just for me, but I think that they would have also been disappointing for the first Democrat presidents of the Eastern and Central European countries, should they have been among us. Modern economy deformed the idea of the classical economist who had in mind a moral fundament for a healthy economic development that would lead to the creation of a robust middle class, able to support a stable democratic society. If one cannot expect of today's billionaires to fight for changing the very system that created their wealth, often based on financial speculations, governments need to revise their duties. This means that ideas of governance and democracy must be reconsidered. We need a global leadership that can stand up to the exaggerated influence of global companies. The market economy needs to become accountable to a society itself. This translates in the form of laws and regulations that can govern the market and provide free access to its resources from the society at large, refraining from restrictive practices, which would have a negative impact as far as producers are concerned. We must preserve equity to preserve economy and the economic environment per se. In the end, it all comes down to examining the essence of the role of life, which should not be focused entirely on consumerism, money, and growth. There are other social, cultural, intellectual, and spiritual preoccupations that can satisfy our interests without draining the planet's resources. The economic model of the future must not be a prisoner of consumerism and economic growth for the sake of growth. Economy must not be entirely abandoned to the free market, but rather steer to satisfy the needs of the society in its entirety. Such a perspective, moving from the needs of the individual towards the greater good of society, will help ensure sustainability, equality, justice, and correctness. The end goal is to have society run by people and not by the market. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Constantinescu. It was very interesting. Thank you for this analysis. And before we proceed to the presentation of the project, I would like to ask our basic partners, because I think that after the presentation, I pass my functions of moderator to Dr. Kроули, and then to World Academy, and then to the Club of Rome. But nevertheless, I would like to ask two presidents, Garry Jacobs and Mampela Rampelli, if they want to say a couple of words before. Maybe it is up to their decision.
Yes, Yuri, I would like to say a few words, if I may.
Yes, you are most welcome.
First of all, thanks to you and to our colleagues at Moscow State University for organizing this conference, and to our colleagues at the World Academy and Club of Rome for joining in the participation. I think the speakers up until now have framed some very important issues for us, which we would all be in close sympathy with. And I'd like to just make a few comments that I hope will help us when we take the discussion forward as to, based on what we've heard already, how do we proceed? Where do we go from here? I'm particularly happy to be that we are involved in this conference because of the very subject matter that you have framed for it, global social transformation. I think it was Louis Osterbeek who said that we are at an unprecedented time in history when humanity as a whole for the first time, certainly magnitude, is facing a collective issue that we can only address collectively. And we have a greater awareness of that, of our collective responsibility, and we're all in the same dish together in this, than at least we've ever had before. And the question is, we know about the limits. We're really clear about the limits that we're exhausting in our physical environment. We know about the inherent deep flaws and weaknesses in our economic system and the whole neoliberal philosophy. The question is, how do we bring about a global social transformation? What are the instruments we have? What are the things we lack? We know scientifically that we can produce enough energy for everybody on Earth without dependence on fossil fuels and aggravating the problem of global warming. But we're not doing it. We have enough. Finances are not our problem in the sense there's enough money in the world. We have about $250 trillion or more in global financial assets. We're spending $2 trillion a year on, US alone is spending $2 trillion. We're spending about $2 trillion a year on military expenditure. We're only spending about $60 billion on our whole multilateral United Nations system. The problem is not money. The problem is the way it's being utilized. We know that out of this 250 trillion, we're only short by 4 or 5 or 6 trillion a year for making the investments we need in the SDGs to fulfill the SDGs in a timely way. But we're not doing it. We have the technology to create global connectivity for everybody, but as has already been mentioned, we still have 50% of the world that's unconnected, and it's not even that expensive now to do it. We have the knowledge to deliver education, quality education, to people all over the world, and yet we're grossly failing to reach out to all of those who need it and have the aspiration for it. And we have the power. We have the power to make these changes. But where is that power, and what is that power being utilized for now? And how do we transfer that power from those sources and centers in global society that are using that power to reinforce or sustain the present status quo, whether it's economic or political or military or something else? How do we really distribute that power so that we can mobilize global civil society? We can mobilize the population. We can mobilize the younger generations to really exercise that power in the most effective way. All the questions I've raised can be reduced to a couple of issues. And the main question is, what is the process of bringing about a conscious, accelerated transformation of global society? Have we ever done it before? Has anyone ever done it before? We may have done it at the local level. We've done it at the national level in specific areas. But to talk about a global social transformation of the whole system, economic, political, social, ecological, and technological, scientific, we have never attempted something like that before. And that's why this conference and this topic is so important. Because the thing we really lack is, I think, a knowledge of the process by which we consciously change ourselves as a collective humanity. And I think it was Tatiana Valovaya and perhaps others who mentioned we have a multilateral system. We have a multilateral system founded on principles of 75 years ago that's grossly inadequate to serve as our leader for coordinating and bringing together all the potentials we have, all the resources we have effectively. So I'd like to pose this to the group for our discussion as as a question of knowledge. We know the goals of what should be done. We know methods or technologies or things that could do it, but do we know how to get from here to where we have to go? I think that's the right question that this conference is asking. How do we transform ourselves? How do we change, even when we know what's to be done, when it doesn't happen? How do we change ourselves, and what are the strategies for that, and what's the knowledge we need for that, and what's the consensus we have to build for that? Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you very much. And I would like to ask Professor Mampela Rampelli if she's here and if she wants to say some words to the participants before the presentation of the project. Okay, maybe she will join us later. We proceed now to the presentation of the project, which is under elaboration by the team of scientists of the Moscow State University, headed by its rector, a member of the Academy of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Professor Viktor Sadovnichiy. It is entitled Limits to Growth in the 21st Century, and here is the presentation of the project.
In 1972, the first report to the Club of Rome revolutionized the minds of experts around the world. Science had become a powerful force in global politics. For the first time, the whistle has been blown about the danger of pollution, finite resources, and the impossibility of endless population growth. Having adopted these ideas, the world quickly moved to the fifth technological paradigm, which is known as the era of information technology. This paradigm is also focused on green technologies and energy efficiency. However, it turns out that the situation is not as grim as the report suggested. Technology and science have once again proven to be able to overcome many challenges. The growth of the world's population has ceased to be an existential problem, as it has slowed down, and according to most forecasts, it will even stop at the end of this century. On the other hand, the developed world and many developing countries are facing unprecedented new problems: a drop in the birth rate, global aging, and a lack of demographic and labor resources. Global aging is an absolutely unprecedented problem in the history of humankind. It will affect all spheres of life in a radical way. Third world economies are growing. The living standards of developed and developing countries are getting closer, and this process of convergence has to continue. Without convergence, it is impossible to change the world system and solve the climate problem. The problem of convergence is particularly acute for Africa, which is the most dynamic and turbulent continent of the 21st century. It is necessary to integrate the dynamics of Africa into the global movement in an organic and inclusive way. Developing countries need energy, but renewable energy sources, even for developed countries, are still too expensive and unstable. But here is an important question. Is it even possible to stabilize the global temperature by the 2100? Calculations show that it is possible. Humanity may find other sources of cheap and safe energy, for example, thermonuclear fusion. One can argue that it may be reasonable to turn to nuclear energy, which does not produce emissions. But in any case, it is necessary to continue and expand the search for technological solutions throughout the world that can improve energy efficiency, reduce energy consumption, bind CO2, enhance the purification of emitted greenhouse gases, etc. Technologies that are currently under development will allow the production of food for billions of new people. Russian scientists expect a new wave of technological growth in the coming decades starting in the 2030s. It will also be associated with the transition to the sixth technological paradigm. The most dynamic areas of development will be medical, additive, nano, bio, robotics, information and cognitive technologies. This cluster of future technologies was named the man-brain convergence. The sixth technological paradigm will introduce into our life a huge number of self-regulating systems, among which self-driving cars will be only a relatively small, albeit an important part of the new reality. The forthcoming technological wave is called the cybernetic revolution. It is hoped that thanks to this revolution it will be largely possible to solve the climate problem. However, maybe technological development itself has limits. Perhaps this is the first time in the history of humanity when a fundamentally new challenge has emerged, constraining technological growth. At first glance, this limit is aggravated by the fact that there are fewer and fewer incentives for development. But population growth is declining. The innovative spirit associated with young people is leaving the developed world, and then this process will spread to other countries. However, there is a strong impetus to preserve our planet and climate. This will require a powerful strain of human intelligence. Moreover, the world has begun to age rapidly. The developing of medical technology has significantly increased life expectancy, and the cybernetic revolution will increase it even more. However, according to Russian scientists, this could have a positive effect on the development of scientific and technological progress, since this new challenge to humanity will require the breakthrough encompassing medicine, biotechnology, robotics, and cognitive technology in order to improve the quality of biological life of the elderly population, the proportion of which will continue to grow. Global aging is also associated with a change in priority in research. While nature was the object of earlier technological transformations, now humans themselves and their biological nature have become the objects of changes. This promises unprecedented opportunities and, at the same time, requires extreme caution. The entire history of technological progress demonstrates that the solution to problems create new, unforeseen ones. Today, we see this in the example of artificial intelligence, whose horizons are incredible, and which, along with digitalization, has already led to almost total control over human behavior and decrease in the ability to make independent decisions. But what about now? Do we have a comprehensive understanding of how to move forward? Scientists at Moscow University are ready to present the answer. Based on a number of important studies, we created models accounting for resources, economic and technological growth, which describe substantial processes in the society and politics of the world. Instead of declaring the general problems of the world, we're analyzing and reflecting them differently for developing and developed countries, especially for tropical Africa. And unlike the first reports to the Club of Rome, we're trying to take into account development in all spheres. We are modeling the system of social relations, not only in its modern state, but for the human community along the entire path of its historical development. We believe that the era of the last 300 years as a whole, from the beginning of the first industrial revolution, is coming to an end. This was the era of gravitation to the modern Y structure, of the social matrix, liberal and competitive, which became distinctive for technological revolutions. Before that, there was an era of slow technological development in the condition of the zero-sum game, traditional hierarchical social structures, X structures of a distributive type and rigid political systems. The transition from X structures to Y structures was a process of complex reconstruction of a society, accompanied by social political crises and revolutions in the ideological sphere. Now, ideologies legitimize the ongoing transition and principles of organizing a new society. Thus, each transition had its own ideological revolution, without which it would have been impossible. Since the beginning of modern times, the number of people with political rights had gradually increased. Today, there is again an increase in the influence of the powerful minority to limit the de facto rights of the majority in the political sphere. At present, this is especially associated with the monopolization of media and the growing power of big tech. Anyway, we can expect an inevitable transition to new models of society and the world order, from a liberal market economy to a new type of society in which many processes will be controlled by artificial intelligence. Of course, this will not be a medieval X society, nor a modern Y society. So it makes sense to talk about the formation of a new type. In such societies, the following socio-technical self-regulating systems will play an important role, which could significantly change governance and political structure. One of these new types of society can be called the Z society. An important point here is that it will be a totally new type of society, but not a modification of previous ones, like inclusive capitalism, since the transformation will affect all the foundations of life and the organization of society. In terms of values and ideologies, different scenarios are possible. In the first scenario, capitalism will remain a very important part of the economic system, especially in the developing countries, where its potential is far from exhausted. In the future world system, a complex combination of two types of capitalism will arise. A will be a more or less well-known type, taking place in developing countries, and B will be a totally new, digital type, and it will take place in developed countries. In the second scenario, the era of capitalism as a system disappears, since the open world has changed to a closed one, and the positive-sum game is succeeded by the zero-sum game. And there will be no socialism either, since socialism is a product of outgoing industrial era, emerging as an internal alternative to capitalism. So a new global ideology will emerge. An important question: what will a global Z society be like in a closed techno-digital environment? Here a new world order is needed, which will not be either unipolar or bipolar. Most likely it will be a kind of collaboration of the largest world players, which are countries or supranational units. It could be something like the GX, that is the unification of 3, 5, 7, or more major powers and blocks that can somehow arrange a new order. Most importantly, the formation of a new order could stimulate the development of third world countries, and especially Africa. The world is at a crossroads. Either a hierarchical totalitarian state society will be formed, controlled by an explicit or implicit world elite, or the formation of the world organism will take place, that is a society with no discrimination and with deep professional specialization, where management is carried out in the interest of all social strata based on network technology. A world where the elite is controlled by society and is formed on the basis of meritocratic principles. In this regard, the key task is to form a new system of values, a new ideology, which will be different from both the liberal doctrines of the Y society and totalitarian X ideologies. These can ensure movement along the third part of development. Thus, it is essential to understand that the movement towards a post-singular Z society is a human-made process. It is also important to understand that the described process is about designing our future. It will be our own creation. So, will we overcome the outline limits of growth, or will we perish?
Thank you very much for this presentation. And here we have two professors from the team working on this project, Professor Leonid Grinin and Professor Andrei Korotayev. And if there are any questions, they are at your disposal to present their answers and ideas. Anyway, if there are no questions for the time being, we can proceed to the discussion, and I would like to pass my rights as moderator to Dr. John Krouli, asking them to take over the power in our revolutionary society.
Thank you very much, Yuri. My understanding was that we were actually doing this together, and it would be a very great pleasure to continue to do it jointly. Many revolutions have led, at least initially, to triumvirates or diarchies or various kinds of power sharing, which usually don't last very long. The career of Napoleon Bonaparte is exemplary of taking power in a small group of three and then eliminating the other two. But I'm sure at least to the end of the afternoon, we can stay in harmony and unity. Thank you very much for inviting me to share the moderation. I will say just one thing before we start, which is a word of deep appreciation for the comments made by Dean Ilin in his opening speech earlier about me. It was slightly embarrassing to be showcased in that way, but I was very touched by his words and by the attention. It is indeed perhaps the last time that I will be in this kind of meeting wearing this hat, this metaphorical hat as a UNESCO official. But as he said, I hope it will not be the last time I'll be participating with other future hats still to be designed. I know that Carlos Альварес Перейра was due to speak, so I think I'll give him the floor immediately, if that's okay. And then we'll see which other comments, questions, remarks there might be in response to the opening statements and to the presentation we just listened to. I myself have several, but of course I'm here first to moderate and only secondarily to comment. Carlos, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, John. Dear Yuri, Professor Sayamov, many thanks for organizing this. To you and of course your colleagues of the Moscow State University. I'm not sharing the screen. This is not mine. So, okay. Yes, I wanted to make some remarks on behalf of the Club of Rome, especially inspired by everything I heard. I mean, I must say I'm impressed by all I heard, including the presentation on the work you are doing at the Moscow State University. Of course, the Club of Rome is preparing a number of activities, and you will hear much more about the 50th anniversary of the Limits to Growth publication, which will happen next year. We are working on our side on a number of topics, including the burning issue of how could we make compatible the limits to growth, the planetary boundaries, with the goal of sustainable development, or in the expression I use, equitable human well-being within a healthy biosphere. But I must say I'm impressed, particularly impressed by what I've seen now in this presentation, because I see that there is a lot of good work being done I am impressed actually, but not completely surprised, because it is a strong tradition, and Professor Ilian mentioned 3 names where there was a connection between your university and your scientific environment and the Club of Rome. I want to mention them again: German Visciani, Sergei Kapitsa, and Ilya Prigozhin. So we can see the hairs in a way I mean, it's, I congratulate you. I'm very happy to see the heritage of all that brilliant thinking, which is quite apparent in the work you are doing. And I want to build on something which has been mentioned in the presentation, but also in some of the talks by our colleagues, and particularly by Mrs. Gabriela Ramos. I think she said it very well. We need a new course, a new model of human development. The presentation shows that we are, and it was already said by others, that we are, not only that we're at a critical point, but that we will go into a process of bifurcation. So the message is either we disappear, which is possible, unfortunately, as a species. Don't worry too much about life at large, it will survive without us on Earth. But either we disappear as a species, or we go into a completely different kind of configuration. This is what Professor Prigozhin developed in a brilliant way in the 70s with his analysis of far from equilibrium systems and his analysis of critical points, thresholds, and bifurcations. So I think we are there. We think, the Club of Rome thinks we are there. And this is why we adopted, under the new presidency of Mampela Rampele and Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, we adopted 3 years ago the lemma emergence from emergency. The critical point in which we are is an emergency or multi-emergency, a set of convergent emergencies. Something new can emerge out of that. But what and how, as Garry Jacobs mentioned, how do we go forward? How do we explore? Because the bifurcation will be so significant that we cannot know in full details what will be the future. The Z society to which the presentation was alluding, and I'm very much interested, and we will be happy to work with you, with the team at the Moscow State University in the coming months about these ideas, your concepts, and giving feedback about that. But we cannot know for sure in the details what it will look like. To a large extent, the path forward is not only about the implementation of ideas that we already have and technologies that are already possible. It's largely a path forward of exploration of uncharted territories. And for that exploration, what is the compass? And I would put the emphasis on something which has been mentioned, but mostly in implicit ways. The compass is cultural change. That's the key issue, the transformation of culture. And this does not make it easier, because culture is what we know, but we don't know we know it. What governs how our perceptions of reality are transformed into interpretations. And so the change of culture cannot be governed the way we design and build a bridge to say something. But it is a cultural change, and in my view, to get out of a tragic trilemma in which we are and where tensions are accumulating, which is the trilemma between 3 different imperatives: the ecological one, which in the long term will be determining, will overcome all others; the democratic one, the aspiration of all humans to live in dignity and being respected and have good lives; and the rentier imperative, which is the imperative, the aspiration we have, because it's quite general, to live from the past, from the future returns of something we did in the past. This renter imperative is an issue because it's like cheating with time. And my approach is that we have to reconcile, we have to develop new relationships with others, with life, nature, and with time, because if we don't do that, the three imperatives will definitely clash in ways which will not be nice at all. So for me, the compass is this cultural change, which, by the way, is happening already to a large extent, and below, some of that is below the radar, actually. But it's not consolidating. I mean, the cultural change is also the different attitude. First of all, and I'm very hopeful about that, the outstanding change in the status of women and the role of and the participation of women in shaping the future, but also the change of culture in younger generations. Compared to that, as Luis Osterbeck was saying, institutions are not changing fast enough. Geopolitics is very much following the same codes as in centuries ago. I'm reading now books about the great game, you know, the fight between big powers to control Central Asia. Well, to a large extent, what we see in geopolitics is very much the same, because the shift we need to make is from a shift of a culture based on competition creating the perception of scarcity. If we all compete, we have to fight against each other. A shift from that to a culture of collaboration, a culture of relationships in which we have the perception of abundance and we know that we can have good lives because we are together. And you know what? To do that, we have to weave together threads of knowledge that already exist, already are there, but have been ignored for a long time. And particularly the threads of wisdom from indigenous cultures, from cultures which are still alive in spite of colonization. To a large extent, modernity with a big M is still in the colonial mindset. But Africa has been mentioned several times, and I cannot agree more on the importance of Africa. It has been mentioned several times in the presentation of your work. By the way, half of youth in the world will be African in a couple of decades. So just to mention that as the factor of crucial importance. Africa is still home. It's not only the cradle of humanity, it's still home to cultures where relationships are the essential element. Ubuntu and many others cultural worldviews from Africa are still alive, and this is the kind of knowledge we have to weave together with the best of our modern science to create, to facilitate, and to consolidate the cultural change which could lead to a completely different configuration of a society in which human well-being is reconciled with life at large. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlos. I have two requests for the floor. Thank you for using the little electronic hand feature. It's very convenient for the moderator. Can I invite anyone else who later wishes to ask for the floor to do the same? It's easier, for instance, than doing so in the chat. So first, Mira Chakravorty, and then Michael Marion, please.
I thank the organizers. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, and especially Professor Carlos Pereyra, who invited me to this group to raise the question against the question of Gabriela. When you ask Gabriela that the transformation is possible or not, or you raise the question of inequities, you yourself mentioned how the inequalities in vaccine distribution has happened. I would rather support Professor Carlos that there has to be a attitudinal change. I think you also, John, you also perhaps mentioned that the attitudinal change has to be there. And I think we should claim simplicity. Will my CEOs, the companies, listen to me if I say that, okay, you have to come down to the level of, you just cannot, as another speaker mentioned earlier, that within the pandemic year, how much wealth has increased. This is how will the inequality really go away? You just can't wish it to go away. It is going to remain unless I and you and them, the market-oriented economy, consciously make an effort to really practice simplicity, not just a rhetoric, but yes, actual practice. If Gandhi could do, Aurobindo could do, if Jesus could do, Jesus said, trust, you have to, I am the truth, you have to trust. So he was saying, trust me, I am the truth, you just trust me. So this human relationship, Africa is brought out, but right, the human relationship is so important. In market economy, I don't find the human relationship at all. And I'm sorry that I cannot completely appreciate the documentary which is done by, what is his name, Vladimir, whatever the research person, on the AI, on the artificial intelligence, because, I mean, I'm impressed certainly, but because the hierarchy there to use the artificial intelligence does not go away. Artificial intelligence will just be a tool, a means to do something, to achieve, to lighten your burden, perhaps. But if I depend too much on the artificial intelligence, make it the objective, make it the goal, make it the end, I'm not going to survive because I cannot trust the power equation that's going to exist always. And the power equation is going to use the artificial intelligence as they have always done. Therefore, unless I consciously bring a kind of a spiritual element to that I would practice simplicity, that I would practice living with the animals, the trees, the flora and fauna, and other human beings, that I would realize that I am part of your group, your existence. I can't think that the balance or harmony can really be done. And business has to certainly follow a people-oriented policies, not people to be exploited by the business. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It strikes me how much there is a convergence emerging, and we'll see if the next two speakers go in the same direction, around what would probably be called in French a falsely simple question, which is the relation between ideas and change. It's very clear that change is at least in part driven by ideas, but ideas are not self-generating. They have backdrops, they have conditions, they come from somewhere, so that to some extent the change happens by producing the ideas it needs to change. But in that case, it looks just like a vicious circularity. And everything we're saying here, particularly, of course, from the perspective of a fundamentally values-driven organization like UNESCO, is what scope is there for the international community or some group within it to choose the ideas that are necessary to achieve a desired direction of change. And the meta question, whether that question is even meaningful. Are ideas the kinds of things that can be chosen in that way? Or are great transformations, to paraphrase Polanyi's famous book, simply the coming together of structural processes that create an account of themselves that cannot be separated from the processes that make them possible. But I imagine the discussion will be to some extent a lot about this. So I'd like to give the floor to Michael Marian, followed by Andrei Korotayev. If you could please unmute yourself, we can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I want to apologize. I had trouble with audio, and it took a while for me to learn that I can get on the cell phone as an alternative. So here I am. I think I'm the only one using a phone. Anyway, I'd like to pick up on what Gary said about the process of bringing about an acceleration transformation of global society. And I would like to suggest three very broad directions that I think we will eventually have to encounter. First, I'd like to say the presentation here is very exciting, well thought out, very interesting. Please continue with thinking about the limits to growth in the 21st century. However, there are also other players, organizations and individuals who are talking about transformation, using the T word, want to accelerate transformation. And I think that you have to identify the major players, such as the Transformation to Sustainability program in Paris. This is the Sustainable Society Science Consortium in Tokyo, the Stockholm Resilience Center, the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, World in 2050 Project, and so forth. There's maybe about 10 or 15, depending on how you'd identify as the majors, and I think it would be useful just to have a conversation with them and to coordinate and to see what they're thinking, which is along similar lines. The second general perspective that you need to accelerate the process is to separate the generalists from the specialists. I mean, we are talking in general terms about a global transformation, but there are also organizations talking about transformation within various sectors that you could break down the sustainable development goals so that you could see organizations and missions. They're just confined to that sector, but they too are talking about transformation. So it's important to set up a dialogue between the generalists and the specialists and to learn from each other. And then thirdly, and possibly the most important, but also the most difficult perspective, is to set up some sort of dialogue with the reactionaries, the vested interests, people who call themselves conservatives, and to really engage them in dialogue, which is very difficult. We're having the problem here in the United States, and you want to do it on a global scale, but eventually I think it'll have to be done because they are a drag on process. Okay, that's enough. Thank you very much for giving me my say.
Thank you very much. Mr. Korotayev.
Let me say one thing. I have very recently prepared a preliminary list of 30 organizations that are talking about transformation. I sent it to Gary. I don't know if he's had time to look at it. He hasn't responded, but if you want to see these organizations, just a rough sketch of what's involved, and ask Gary, and I hope that he can pass it on to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrei Korotayev.
Hello, it was very nice to take part in this conference, in this forum. No, I would speak on behalf of the group of scientists who is preparing now a new report to the Club of Rome, whose preliminary ideas were presented today in the presentation, which everybody saw. No, it's no, of course, as was said, this team of scientists is headed by the rector of the university, Victor Sadomnici, and by the first president of the Kyrgyz Republic, who is now a research professor at Ilya Prigozhin Institute of Mathematical Investigation of Complex Systems, Askar Akayev. No, they are both, of course, first of all, mathematicians. No, so, of course, No, in some respects, we wanted to return to the format of the first report to the Club of Rome. That is, we are going to rely very heavily on mathematical modeling. And I think we have skills to do this. Indeed, the idea is to try to model all aspects of the possible transformations, economic, climatic, but also political, social, cultural, value systems. Even as regards value systems, there are some possibilities of mathematical modeling. A sort of breakthrough research was done by a Russian scientist working now in the University of California, Irvine, Lefebvre, who wrote a book, The Algebra of Conscience, showing how it is possible to mathematically model even such subtle things as transformations of conscience. So yes, this is our idea. And first of all, I would like to notice that indeed we have a great degree of consensus on the basic ideas, on our basic aims as regards identification of the main concerns with which our planet is dealing now. That it is very nice to see that all of us are aiming basically the same things, like just inclusive, environmentally friendly society. And the point that, of course, we are not going to predict. Of course, our modeling will be scenario modeling. Of course, we are plan to develop a few scenarios, but one of them would be to identify a possible optimum scenario, a kind of society with type of which all of us would agree, and what kind of steps should be taken in order to get to this type of society, which is called this society, but it can be called just inclusive society, environmentally friendly society of a new type. Because I think everybody agrees that we need the significant social, cultural transformation in order to get to this new type of society. This should be neither socialism, neither capitalism, but some new type of society. And so the idea is how to get to this type of society, and also to model the possible trajectories to this type of society. So again, it was very nice to hear what I have heard today, and to see this very high degree of consensus which we are having now. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me perhaps, before giving the floor to the next person who's asked for it, put a question on the table for you, which perhaps you can answer later. Of course, it is possible that the future social change might lead to a gradual universalization of a particular model, but it's presumably equally possible that new dividing lines will emerge between competing models, or perhaps equally likely between models that don't compete, but coexist without really interacting. And these divisions might not necessarily be between particular regions or countries, but perhaps equally within each society, so that the various social models are not incompatible paths, but perhaps rather geological strata, which will show up, yes, in a kind of stratigraphic way as composing future societies. In much the same way, and this has often been analyzed, that industrial society has maintained many features, both cultural, imaginary, and even to some extent economic, of feudal societies without completely replacing them, so that you have this overlay of different logics at work within the same society. So I will leave that off on the table just for the moment and give the floor to Mila Popovic, who's asked to speak, and then perhaps we'll see who else wants to speak, or you may get the chance to answer or reflect on my question. Please.
Thank you so much, John. Good to be here, and thank you for the invitation, Yuri, and the organizing committee. I appreciate, John, that you spoke of the alternative social models, and I guess the challenge that the previous speakers have pointed out too is that they are not well connected into a field, into a cultural field that can actually expand enough to influence and tilt this transformative process into full transformation. I'm really interested in what you said you so eloquently and elegantly put the relationship between ideas and change. And it's not that we don't know how the change happens. We've had models and institutions that we have applied and built to do so. We have education, religion, arts. We also have marketing, markets, and entertainment. And on the one spectrum, not to polarize things, I'm just trying to kind of sketch a picture here. Education, religion, and arts are usually working on the long-term wave, and they're based on a valuing of process. Whereas markets, marketing, and entertainment are based on a promise rather than process, primarily on the promise, and are based on the short-term process. So on one hand, you have what is it that you can have and do, as opposed to, or not as opposed to, but what do you become? So when you spoke of the values-driven organizations and their role in the 21st century, what kind of methodologies, approaches, and strategies they can apply, I think this is the key here to start thinking about what are the ways in which these domains, different domains, one based on the long-term wave and based on process, and that based on short-term and based on a promise, can learn from each other. I mean, we certainly have seen models of marrying marketing and evangelism to quickly and effectively and exponentially build movements. And part of this is also the question I would pose and put on the table. What are the ways in which we as organizations can infuse the social field with the value of becoming? The value of becoming as a social currency. And as a way, of course, of spreading the change and transformative change, not any change, transformative change.
Thank you. Sorry, that was the end of the paragraph, wasn't it? I wasn't sure. Yes, absolutely. And since to some extent I raised the question, we should be very clear that this connection between ideas and their effects, which are also causes, and this whole complex of connections between ideas and the dynamics of which they give an account has been theorized 100 times in 100 different ways in the past couple of centuries. And it's important both to recapture what was valuable in traditional statements of those ideas, one of the earliest and most famous of which is Hegel's phenomenology of spirit, but the foundational ideas of sociology were basically all about this, but at the same time recognize that not everything works in those ideas, and in particular that they have tended traditionally to be excessively universalizing and probably insufficiently attentive to complexity and unpredictability, as well as to forms of reversibility, not to contradict what was said earlier by Garry Jacobs about the irreversibility of certain planetary processes, but just as a reminder that whatever the direction of intellectual and moral development is, it is not inherently necessarily monotonic in the mathematical sense. There is such a thing as moral decay, for instance, and it has been exhibited at many times in recent history. Anyway, it's not for me to make speeches. Saritha, you asked for the floor. Can I ask those who have spoken and are happy with what they said to take the electronic hand down? So I know that the electronic hands that are up correspond to new requests for the floor. Thank you. Saritha, the floor is yours.
Well, I would like to thank everyone, especially the participants and all the dignitaries of the United Nations. I would like to ask a few questions about the apathy. We know that empathy is a universal solvent, and apathy of some countries' foreign policy, the changes they are unable to make, is making this pandemic gullible by war. So what can we do to make some changes where we can induce empathy instead of apathy? That's what because we aren't sure like there are going to be any reforms about saving the wildlife, and we know that the pandemic has arisen because of the some origins and some findings have been provided evidence that it's because of the invasion of wildlife. So will the countries will all the countries make sure that the wildlife is protected on the planet so that we do not have any other biohavoc? Thank you very much.
Very good question, on which UNESCO is much mobilized. As perhaps you know, there is an increasing emphasis on biodiversity and its connection with social change within the UN agenda, including UNESCO's agenda. And you make a very important point. You also raise a very interesting point of psychology meets moral philosophy, which is whether there's any necessary connection between empathy and a desire to act on empathetic feelings. I'm not sure empathy and apathy are necessarily contradictory, and it is very possible, at least empirically, both to feel deeply sad about something and do absolutely nothing about it. There was a famous book about this a few years ago by the French sociologist Didier Fassin called Souffrance à distance, long distance suffering, which was about the media construction of global humanitarian action, or often rather inaction, which basically framed a possible answer to your question as certain forms of media-driven, distanced, unengaged empathy as actually conducive to apathy. I just put that on the table because what you said made me think suddenly of that well-known book. I don't know if it's been translated, but certainly well-known in French. Andrei Korotayev wanted to respond perhaps to what I said earlier, and John Bunsel, I'll then give you the floor.
Yes, no, just answering what you said. No, actually, we completely agree with your attitude. No, by the way, in our optimum scenario, capitalism does not disappear entirely, but it is restricted to certain niches. No, so in this respect, the model of transition from feudalism to capitalism is repeated. So no, we find that in some respects, in certain for certain purposes, capitalism could be no, quite effective, but it should be regulated and it should be restricted. No, so our attitude is very similar to yours. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Can I speak about the global solutions regard how empathy can create a positive impact on humanity?
Well, it will be very difficult for me to say no when you've claimed the terrain of empathy. So yes, it's different.
So it's like we know that there are some countries which breed terror, and where we are aware that terror is a global network, work, and there are some countries which do not empathize with terror and terror regarding problems. So don't you think that men with morality and women with empathy can create positive solutions, and wherein like how about teaching more education with ethics as an important aspect in the educational system, wherein we can understand that if morality is induced in the youth, then there will be many changes that can be made regarding the recruitment policy or policies of the global terror organizations.
It's a very good question, and I'm not sure. I'd be interested in other people's answers. Were there sentimentality in the most neutral sense of the word is conducive to good action is something that's been in discussion in moral philosophy for a very, very long time. If you're a Humean in a broad sense, you would probably say that yes, the natural feelings of sympathy, as they would have said in the 18th century, or empathy, are probably the basis of good actions. But even in the 18th century, Kant was a bit skeptical about that. And since then, a lot of people have worried whether how I feel about it might be actually a very poor guide to whether I'm actually doing the right things. And as you know, there's a whole rational choice-inspired movement around so-called effective altruism, which takes the completely opposite perspective on that and disconnects judgments about what should be done from empathetic feelings, though of course there's a general desire to act for the good, and insists that you should actually find ways of rationalizing and objectivizing moral choices if you're not to fall victim to the illusions of sentimentality. So there's some very interesting debates there.
Sorry for the time, but I didn't have any other platform to discuss openly about this subject, which is very much vital to humanity and the security of humanity, because we cannot compromise on these factors and create loopholes for these terror organizations or even the pandemics or any other global problem which can cause problems to nature as well as to humanity. So I'm a creative writer as well as like I have I have completed my course in criminology. So when I understood the origins of crime, it's all about the psychopathy and psychopathology and narcissism that are the main reasons for these kind of problems. So don't you think that if we make a global solution for these problems and emphasize to nations which are victimized by global terror to implement certain invincible techniques, taking help of the technology and moral aspects in the society? Thank you.
Thank you. Please, John Bonsall, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you very much to Gary and to World Academy for the invitation, and thank you for the interesting presentations. I mean, one of the themes that seems to be running through some of the presentations is that everyone seems to know what needs doing, but there's an enormous gap that the actions necessary are not being taken by governments. And I just wonder, you know, I haven't yet heard the suggestion that almost all global problems seem to me to suffer from the same dynamic, which is that they require global cooperation, and yet any nation that moves first to try to resolve climate change or nuclear weapons would only suffer an economic or military competitive disadvantage. So there is a sort of first mover competitive disadvantage or a game theoretical barrier to solutions. And I just would like to suggest that if we could see that just about all global problems suffer from this dynamic, I call it destructive global competition, or this first mover competitive disadvantage barrier, then that would provide much more focus as to how we might find solutions. And it would give us a common enemy, as it were, around which to rally. So I just put that there.
Sorry.
It looks like John is frozen. John Krouli is frozen. Who would like to speak next? I don't see any other hands up. Olivia, at one time, did you signal that you wanted to speak? I thought you did, but you didn't.
Ready?
Yuri, yes.
Hello.
I just would like to say that there is another presentation on behalf of the president of Prigozhin Kondratiev Research Institute, Professor Yakovets. It is a written and graphic presentation. If you permit, I would ask to give this presentation, and it is up to you to decide if we can put it in chat, for example, in order that everyone can read it more attentively. But it is how you will see it with our time limits. Can I propose this presentation now?
Please. Please, Yuri, go ahead.
My apologies to everyone. We just had a power interruption here at UNESCO. So I had to switch to my laptop urgently. I don't know if you can still see and hear me.
Yeah, John.
Yes, sorry.
In the meantime, when you were absent, there was a exchange of between me and Garry, because Garry took the initiative to continue moderating. And there is a presentation by Professor Yakovets, president of Prigozhin Kondratiev Research Institute. It is unwritten, it is graphic. And what I propose that we switch it on, and you as moderator decide, maybe we can place it in chat that everyone can read it attentively.
Yes, please. I think that would be very helpful. I did see your message, and then just as I was reading it, the electricity crashed.
How we proceed with it. And after that, there is also a report by Ivan Elishkovsky, short one.
Yes, please. So, sorry, just to be clear, you're putting it just in the chat or making a presentation of it?
We switch it on, and you will decide how we proceed with it.
Okay, very good.
Володя, включите, пожалуйста, презентацию Юрия Владимировича и отца.
Да, сейчас, секундочку.
But will someone speak to this text? Because I don't know if it's very convenient. I mean, some people read fast, some people don't. I don't think it's very
I think it is
easy.
better maybe to place it for reading in chat. Because Professor Yakovets, he cannot comment it now.
Very good. So thank you for making it available. And the idea of a great rift is clearly very relevant to the kinds of things that were being discussed earlier. Let me try to get back into business as moderator. Indeed, in one version of the program, we were co-moderating with Garry, with Carlos as well. So perhaps I can invite Garry to intervene if he wishes to make any comments or raise any questions based on what's been said so far.
John, you're doing such an excellent job. I don't want to interfere. Please.
Thank you. You're too kind. So can I then invite among those who haven't spoken yet, who would like to come in on one or other of the questions raised so far? I think the questions, obviously I'm simplifying hugely, but clearly there is a meta question, which is conceptual and also methodological, about how ideas connect to the change that they account for, how ideas of change connect to actual change, which can be explored in a multiplicity of different ways with reference to literature or to history or in a speculative manner. But then, of course, below that, for any given approach to articulating ideas and change, there are certain specific sets of issues that were raised in particular in the presentation earlier, one of which I have to say I found particularly interesting, and I would be interested to hear others' comments on, which is the idea that looking forwards to what will happen over the next 30, 50, 100 years, instead of assuming that the human is a reasonably stable category, stabilized by long biological evolution and reasonably converging technological and cultural change to become a kind of fixed point around which future technological and other dynamics will be organized, we might have to think about the human as being the object of change, which means that reflexive ideas about what the human should be become technological programs for transforming the human in order to align it to some extent, and with possible pushback and divisions and inequalities of access and so on, with that normative idea. And I think this was very explicit in the presentation earlier, the idea that life technologies in the broad sense might come to reshape the human and therefore deprive us of any stable bedrock around which to organize, in particular, our values. And this is a challenge for a values-driven organization like UNESCO, but equally to many of us on this call who are committed in various ways to sets of values. If our values are defined, for instance, by human rights, human dignity, the fundamental equality of human beings, and so on, and by the requirements, both functional and ethical, of human solidarity based on interdependency, what happens when the adjective human ceases to be a stable point and becomes a technological project? I saw at least one physical hand raised, Olivia, and Ivan raised his electronic hand, in that order, I think. So Olivia Vina, let me give you the floor, and then Ivan Aleshkovsky, I'll give you the floor.
John, thank you very much. And thank you to all the speakers. When you were deleted from our screen for technical reasons, John, I just posted a little summary of my question, but I'll raise it now again from the chat. I think that whilst a lot of what we've shared is very fundamental to the question that was raised by Garry, which is how do we transform at the global scale within the time that we have? My concern, listening to all of us, is do we actually really know what the problem is? Do we have a really agreed understanding that is sufficiently global about what the problem is before we leap into beautiful scenarios or less than beautiful scenarios possibly and modeling efforts? Because it is a concern in that sense that if we don't step back to occupy that very murky and painful space of what is the problem, whatever other answer to the problem then is a risky business. And I feel that I would like to challenge UNESCO, which seems to be the one organization that has some hold into that space of complexity that is values and that is diversity. And that was also, I'm so grateful to all of those who raised the issue of diversity, including diversity of ways of knowing and understanding our world and what is the problem and what might be the solutions. And it seems to me that with all the beautiful technology we have, we are doing so little to create the space for that diversity to contribute to defining the problem before we leap into the solutions search. So sorry, that was convoluted perhaps, but it was my concern listening to some of the answers here. Thank you.
Thank you. A very clear and very appropriate concern. My instinctive feeling is that no, we probably do not have a common problem definition. And indeed, a lot of the fights in the global ideas space are precisely about the definition of problems and certainly about the prioritization of problems. I would add to that before giving Ivan the floor, a very interesting question raised by David Harries, who I think in the meantime has left the meeting and left his legacy in the chat. And it's a very important question. You've probably seen it. If we have a plan, a project, an aspiration, and we can't achieve it in full, should we aim for it or not? And this, of course, in economics is known technically as the second order optimum problem. Partial achievement of the first order optimum might not be a second order optimum. Maybe fully achieving something else would actually give us a better outcome than partially achieving the unachievable ideal. And this is very challenging for ideas of rationality. This can be visualized very easily by hills. If you have a tall hill and a small hill, and you can reach the top of the small hill, but only get part of the way up the big hill, what's the optimum in the real world? Is it in fact to climb the big hill as far as you can go, or is it actually to climb the small hill to the very top? And there's a lot of technical work in general equilibrium theory on this, and it actually undermines the idea of Walrasian equilibrium completely. So what's the case? Of course, the UN system is committed to an idea that going for the first order optimum as far as we can is a moral duty. And if we die on that hill, we will die on it. And if we don't get very far up the slope, so be it. But what do we do with the possibility that the opportunity cost of investing in that has actually been failing to achieve something more modest that was actually achievable? I leave you with that speculative challenge and give the floor to Ivan.
Thank you very much, John. Dear colleagues, the aim of our report with Professor Bondarenko is to acquaint the global scientific community, the representatives of the Club of Rome and the World Academy of Art and Scientists participating in today's forum with the conceptual framework of the new paradigm of global development. The need to move to the new global development paradigm has been actively debated in recent years. The issue has been addressed by Garry Jacobs, President of World Academy of Arts and Sciences, by members of Club of Rome. It has also been stated in Klaus Schwab concepts of global restructuring of the world. Our studies
Ivan has frozen.
Yep. I hope it's the present development model is an efficient.
Ivan, your connection is very bad, unfortunately. And you seem even to have dropped off the call.
I hope
you're back.
And now it's better now.
Unfortunately, no, it's not better. It's bad. We can't understand you. Sorry. Maybe turn the camera off and see if the audio is fine without the video.
I hope it would be better. Is it so?
Yes, it's better without the video. Thanks.
Great. So thank you very much. I will try to finish our presentation. Our studies has shown that the present-day development paradigm serves the interest of the small group of people. And this paradigm should be changed. The COVID pandemic has widely demonstrated the fragility and vulnerability of a single country and the world as a whole. Measures taken by different states to present COVID pandemic has aggravated crisis signs, and we need to find the new solutions. Many experts believe that the artificial intelligence technologies and digitalization can give rise to some sort of useless classes. Under such conditions, the risks for the survival of human civilization are increasing. A year ago, in May 2020, in Le Monde was published an open letter from almost 200 public figures calling on state leaders and citizens to change their way of life in order to prevent a global catastrophe. A shift to a new development paradigm is needed to prevent a global catastrophe. The new paradigm will imply the harmonization of interests of different social groups and creation of a new social environment corresponding to the 21st century technologies. Our studies have shown the paradigm to be most suited for the future and to be the one that takes account of the objective laws of development. Necessary prerequisites for the transition to a new paradigm were created by the fourth industrial revolution. New digital technologies became a basis for the shaping of an economy of harmonized interest. They will make it possible to establish a direct relationship between production and consumption in real time and make the transition to personalized production at the request of particular individual without producing anything unusually. Under such a model, the individual will be motivated for self-development both physically and intellectually. The digital economy is an economy of a real-time harmonization of the interests of the state, society, business community, and all individuals at each level. We suppose that in the digital economy, and with the help of the digital technologies, it would be able to harmonize the interests of each individual with the interests of the others at each local level and in real time. The synchronization of the technological singularity of the digital economy with the singularity of newly evolved relations between people represents sufficient conditions for bringing forward the desired moment in the future. Under these new conditions, it can be created the possibility for crisis-free evolution without any types of warfare and for the efficient use of resources available. The transition to the new global has to avoid new global crises and disasters, such as COVID pandemic. The practical use of the new toolkit will make it possible to develop a unified strategy for sustainable development at the local, national, and global levels, not through trial, intentionally for the benefit of everyone on our planet. That is the only condition for crisis-free evolution, for the elimination of all cases of risks, and for the security of individual, or any small territory, region, country, and the world as a whole. Work for the attainment of the single ultimate goal of global development is a strategical task for the world as a whole and for each country. Thank you very much. Professor Bondarenko have published in the scientific magazine of the World Academy of Arts of Scientists her paper, and I hope that colleagues will have the possibility to get acquainted with this paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ivan. Carlos, you asked for the floor.
Yes, I wanted to build on and partially answer the question by the excellent questions put forward by Olivia Bina. Of course, we don't have a common understanding of the problem. We are very far from that. But may I be bold and provocative? I think we will never have a common understanding of the problem. But even more provocative, we don't need it. Because that would be, that's the traditional approach of modern thinking, the linear one, that, okay, let's agree on the definition, on the statement of the problem in an explicit manner, and then we can discuss what are the solutions or the ways to reach the solution, and let's find out. And I see this all the time. We all agree on the complexity of the world, which is not an issue because complexity and life are the same thing. Complexity is one characteristic of life, but we agree on the complexity of the world, and a second later we want a linear plan in 10 easy steps to get where we. No, I mean, it doesn't work that way. The idea of having a common understanding of the problem is actually very much linked to the idea of universalism, which in my view, and I'm deliberately provocative, is still part of the colonial mindset, which has been so successful in modernity. We don't need that because systems don't change, complex systems, living systems, much less a global society, will not change following a conscious plan elaborated by enlightened people. Complex systems, living systems change by learning. So the focus, we have to move the focus from having a plan to exploring uncharted territories and focusing on what tools do we use, how do we explore those territories, and choosing how we explore them. We can choose to destroy, one option is eco-fascism, let's be blunt. Eco-fascism is an option in the scenarios, but another option, and this is what the Club of Rome, of course, promotes, and this is also mine in particular, another option is say, let's explore together from the pluriversality of perspectives, following your point, Olivia, on the different epistemologies, ontologies. That's a richness. And thanks to that richness, we might reconcile human development, or reinvent the concept of human development to reconcile it with life at large. But this is one path, and I don't see this happening by agreeing all of us and all institutions at the global level on one path forward. We could agree, I hope we could agree on, let's create the conditions for societies, human societies, to learn by themselves in a multiplicity of ways, which will be very much context dependent and culture dependent.
Thanks, Carlos. I certainly agree with that, but not everyone does. So I think it's an important issue to have a discussion about. Yuri Sayamov, please.
John, I would like also to make a couple of remarks because I also agree with Carlos, and I think he made a very important remark. But what I am worried about, it is that today, almost half a century after the famous report was published, we find ourselves in a much more dangerous and unbalanced world than it was in 1972. In this world of today, the question, what is growth, is less obvious than ever before. Today, by the way, many people mentioned it. It is a way out or a threat, a remedy to access good for all, or in a species path to a common decline. This is also the question, what is growth? What should be understood today by the growth, and what respectively are the limits for it? And I spoke already about the growing complexity of the world and about the human lack, but real existential risks today are seen in some matters which did not exist in such way that time when the famous report was composed. Real existential risks could be seen today in ethical matters. In ethical matters of bioethics, of ethics of science, of ethics of artificial intelligence, in which people are just coming to understanding of their global danger, and they are making first, let us say, attempts to explore their limits. Mrs. Valovaya spoke today about a well-known expression by the UN Secretary General about horsemen of apocalypse. I'll not repeat it, but today it seems that he added, by the way, the fifth horseman, but maybe their number is not limited by that. And permanently developing and improving technologies change the quality of human life, bringing, of course, huge benefits, but with them a huge harm and danger as well. Civilization processes are being reprogrammed and reshaped on digital platforms in the interests of the few against the interests of the majority. Human consciousness is subjected to manipulative influences and is gradually transformed under the impact of purposefully constructed information flows with a wide use of various fictions and historical falsifications. The word fake, which was not used at that time in 1972, I did not heard about anything that time, but today it is also a very common word and meaning a lot. And the third horseman mentioned by Antonio Guterres it is catastrophic mistrust, catastrophic level of mistrust, which, by the way, tomorrow 2 presidents will try to overcome in Geneva. It is also a big danger for everybody. And it also puts a question mark on the problem of the limits to growth. These are just a couple of remarks I wanted to make to show that we have, as it was stated today many times, we have to think differently for what was the case in 1972. We have to think not only half a century later, but we have to think 1 century, because half a century should be ahead. We have a horizon, should have a horizon a little bit for a couple of, let us say, dozens of years ahead of us. And think, by the way, about new sustainable development goals. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks in particular for the reminder of 2 things which are important for the UN system. The first is that quite quickly within the next few years, the question of what should come after the 2030 agenda will start to be raised, at least in terms of initial brainstorming, because it will take a long time to adopt something, to prepare something ready for adoption in 2030. And secondly, questions will inevitably start to be raised about whether the 2030 agenda is even fit for purpose in this decade. And while it's not the job of the UN system to start challenging its own agenda, we need to listen to be sensitive to the challenges coming from outside, and perhaps already to start critically reflecting at the very least on what we're doing to achieve it, and perhaps also on whether it is fully fit for purpose even now. And the pandemic, of course, creates specific conditions in that regard. Arup Barman asked for the floor. Please go ahead.
Yes, yeah. All the distinguished luminaries of the world are selected personalities in the particularly forum. Very, very interesting deliberation at the same time. Not only it is a meaningful for the future. We are listening to the aspects of the basically socio-political or geopolitical aspects, and at the same time the climate change and technology. My opinion in this case that we have already experienced the concept of the various economic concept, basically starting from the material economy, that's end, how we have consumed the matter. Then we have entered to the knowledge economy. That is also, if the knowledge economy has given a blunder, now for this sustainability, we are at the beginning of the sustainability, that means the knowledge economy itself. We are realizing that we have to think in terms of this, in terms of the sustainability means ultimately it is a wisdom. Now the question is that the wisdom is now only asking the hundreds of the questions to all the thinkers of the entire globe. But the models of this economy, still we have to adopt the wisdom-based economy. I have many platforms, including the Nobel laureates platforms also I have attended. I have seen that this becomes a silent questions. But why we are not going to that particular episteme that the wisdoms will rule? Because we have already got the human society already experienced. The end of the experimentation of the knowledge, and finally we have to enter, and everyone is now trying to enter to the wisdom economy. It is only the internal sensation, and the whole deliberation is only telling internal sensation, but we are not finding the appropriate epistemes at this moment. So why? Another question is that if we adopt any model of the wisdom economy, then how we will give an appropriate shape? Is there any such mechanism which can even control the even technology, the given technology or the given development and the growth together? Because the phase of the knowledge economy is going to get end. because of the experimentation of the knowledge we are doing. One side, we do not have the wisdom that's already expressed or that is already shown by the entire world. We are experimenting so much weapons. We are experimenting anything of the science, but ultimately without having any type of based wisdoms. Now the question is that whether the wisdom economy can rule and can be a model for the next sustainability for the next century or this present century. This is my only the proposition. Maybe we can think of, maybe we can again the further deliberations can be made on this line also. So with this one giving me a chance to talk to you, thank you. That may be okay. Thank you to all.
Thank you very much. Saritha, is your hand still up because you wanted to speak, or did it just stay up? I'm not sure. I think we're coming to the end of this very interesting discussion, so it's perhaps time to start wrapping it up. I think the idea was that the co-moderators, Gary, Yuri, Carlos, and myself, would offer some concluding ideas, not necessarily wrapping anything up, or perhaps wrapping things up the way children do when they give their parents presents. In other words, with the paper torn, the gift only partly covered, and the sellotape horribly tangled all across the floor. But still, it's a wrap-up of a kind. So who would like to go first? Gary, would you like to give a first pass at wrapping up? Can I give you some paper and sticky tape?
Thank you, John, and thanks to all of those who have contributed to this very rich discussion. I'm not going to even attempt anything like a wrapping up or a summarization. I think we've heard many different complementary and sometimes apparently conflicting views, which reflect on the complexity of the issues we're dealing with, and really the unprecedented position that the world finds itself in today. And I think it's good to be aware not only of what we need to know, but to recognize the fact that we're really working in new territory where we don't have all the answers. And as much as we have to be critical of the deficiencies in our thought, we also have to not be paralyzed by any model or doctrine that says either we need to know more or we disagree. We've got to find ways to move forward. And so my closing remark, which is kind of off some of what we've been discussing, but I go back to something, I think it was Federico mentioned very briefly. If we look at what's actually happened, even in the last 1.5 years, we have seen some remarkable signs of change that I don't think anybody expected. I'm not trying to oversell them, but I'm trying to point to the fact. Well, I'll go back briefly to 1989 July. Mikhail Gorbachev and Chancellor Kohl met, and they were discussing the future of Europe. And among the things they discussed was the future of Germany. And in the privacy of a discussion in which there were probably only 4 or 5 people in the room, one of them happened to be a fellow at the academy, they said they agreed that the reunification of Germany was inevitable. But they also agreed, 1989, that it would certainly have to wait till the next century and probably somewhere between 30 and 50 years or more before it could come about. In fact, within 12 months, with less than 12 months, Germany was reunited, was unified. I think it's important for us in looking ahead to realize that not only are the issues complex and very difficult, but when change occurs, it can occur very unexpectedly, way out of line with our expectations, just looking into the near future. We've heard in the last year and a half, we have a new, we heard in the last year and a half, business leaders from all over the world saying, we've made a slight mistake in the theory that businesses must, that their responsibility is only to shareholders and maximizing shareholder value. We have to move to a stakeholder value model. We've heard it from World Economic Forum and from hundreds of senior business. Something which we've known, or many people have known and believed for decades, but didn't believe we would be hearing in the next 3 or 5 years. We've seen a radical change in the monetary theory and financial theories by which the world is being run in the last 2 years, completely in contradiction to the neoliberal model of how particularly public finance should be managed. Things which were totally unpredictable would have been not just criticized, would have been said were impossible 2 years ago. Right after, almost a day or two after Biden became president, General Motors announced and shocked the whole world and said, by the way, within 5 years, we're getting out of petroleum-based automobiles. What was at one time the largest automotive company in the world. I think we need not to ignore these things, but to recognize when the change begins to take place, it takes place in unexpected ways. And the fact that we're seeing changes of this type, which were not predicted, just as they happened in 1989 and 1990, and nobody that I know, at least, and I was involved at that time, predicted what was going to happen in 1989, 1990, or 1991. I think we need the humility to know not only the problems are difficult, but we don't see very clearly what's coming. The point I'd like to make is, and this is not a new idea, I've heard it from many people in many of our conferences, the pandemic creates not only an unprecedented challenge, but an opportunity. And the pressure of that opportunity makes us think and try new things and break some of the habits and inbuilt resistances that we would have thought were cannot be broken in the next 10 years or maybe 30 years or more, as Gorbachev and Kohl said. I think we need this openness to the possibility of rapid social transformation. Not rapid social, all of a sudden the whole system changing, but a breakthrough in areas where we haven't had it up until now. And the belief in that, the conviction in that, and the willingness to act against what our common sense or our physical vision tells us is likely to happen from what's happened in the last few years, I think that's essential to steer us and to moving ahead much quicker than we have before. There are many, many other examples of it that we know, like Elon Musk coming up with this crazy idea that now was the time to transform the automotive industry, and who predicted or who would have believed that so much could have been done in a short time. So I don't think the complexity or the difficulties or the ignorance should prevent us from both believing and trying to act where we can very effectively to move much faster than we have before, even given the fact that the obstacles seem to be immovable obstacles. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
For discussion and all of you.
Thank you very much, Gary. Carlos, your closing thoughts.
Yes, thank you, John. I have 4 closing thoughts. First, honestly, I think the forum was excellent. It went well beyond my expectations, which were already high. But I must thank you, all of you, the organizers, particularly Yuri, but all of you for the quality of the discussions and the interventions. A second remark is that we didn't discover this, but we confirmed again that Yuri, Sayamov, and John Kроули, you are fantastic moderators. So you relieved Gary and myself from that job. Many thanks for that. Again, this is not news, but you did it very well. Third comment is, I see a pathway of working together on the project that has been presented to us on the 50th, on the limits to growth in the 21st century. As I said before, the Club of Rome is also preparing a number of activities for next year. So Yuri, I will be very happy to discuss with you and also with UNESCO and WAAS how we could go forward with understanding better, because we saw an impressive presentation, but of course there is a lot more in your project, understanding better the project and interacting and giving feedback and working together on that for the months to come until including next year. And the fourth comment is about, I think it was pretty obvious, the criticality in these conversations, the criticality of thinking beyond disciplines. It was very apparent. A lot of what we said was, of course, fed by natural sciences, but the words values, ethics, empathy, culture were present in many of the interventions, which is a good sign that of the kind of approach we need to have to continue this work and continue trying to create the conditions for the social transformations we would like to see to happen. In my view, this requires as much Ubuntu and other traditional knowledge as modern science, but definitely also as much natural sciences as humanities and social sciences and all threads of knowledge and ways of knowing, including, of course, artistic languages and artistic expressions. And I would add as much the participation of citizens in the wide sense of the term as experts. I would say, in a way, this leads me to think we have to start from the questions and then work with people in their own contexts and cultures, and then mobilize the experts rather than waiting that the experts could provide in a top-down manner the responses. Because again, this is my very personal approach, we will need to work in a truly pluriversal way to a multiplicity of pathways towards what I think all the members of the people in this room aspire to, well-being in the biosphere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Yuri, would you like to give some closing words?
Thank you, John. I have also some thoughts and conclusions concerning the forum of today. First of all, I am very happy that so many outstanding people accepted our invitation and participated in this forum. I speak not only, of course, about the Director General of United Nations Office in Geneva. I speak not only about Assistant Director General Gabriela Ramos, though their contributions were very important and very instructive. I would mention that Director General Tatiana Valovaya, she gave us important, in my opinion, very important message about the possibility to cooperate on the topic we discussed today with the United Nations system and in particular with the UN office in Geneva, which to some extent is more directly, let us say, connected or inclined to deal with social and human issues. I was very impressed by the words of Gabriela Ramos, and impressed first of all because I felt her dedication to this topic and her desire to be to some extent ahead the time in scientific research and in our way of thinking on this important issue. And I am especially grateful to Professor Federica Mayor, great man who invented global social transformations programs, bioethic programs, many other initiatives working till now. And his contribution was for me not only impressive, but also it was a kind of guidance. And I am very grateful, I repeat, to Professor Mayor. I would mention also very interesting contribution by Professor Osterbeck. I would mention also the interesting analysis given by Professor Constantinescu, former president of Romania. And I am very grateful to my colleagues and friends with whom we gave birth to this scientific event. It was, I consider it as our common initiative, and I am very happy that the discussions developed in the way that some of the participants qualified it even as a platform of wisdom. Of course, for me, maybe it is not achieved so far, but we're on the way to it. And I thank very much Garry Jacobs for his valuable contribution, for his guidance, for his participation. I thank very much Carlos Альварес Перейра, who produced a lot of ideas to be considered. I'll think about it because today, for me at least, there was a lot of rich ideas. And especially, I hope I speak everybody's mind when I thank especially Dr. John Krouli for his efforts, for what he has contributed, not only to global transformations, but also to our friendship, to our scientific cooperation, to our, let us say, junction, if I may use this word, in the research for the future, in our attempts to look a little bit behind the limits that we see today and try to understand what it will be tomorrow. So thank you, John, especially, and I repeat the words of Dean Professor Lin, that we hope very much that we shall continue our cooperation, we shall meet many times, and that the doors of Moscow University are always open to you, as to Carlos, to Garry, as to all friends. I conclude my remarks with thanking everyone for participation, for valuable contributions, and I hope that the forum will be continued and will be continued in particular as most UNESCO event. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Yuri, for your kind words. And I confirm my willingness and enthusiasm to continue to engage with these kinds of ideas. My new space will be partly much more practical than the kinds of things I do in UNESCO, because some of my work in renewable energy will be very hands-on. But I hope still to inhabit the space of ideas and to continue to participate in these kinds of discussions, which obviously interest me deeply, and to which I hope I'll be able to contribute with a different kind of hat and a different kind of professional standing and status. Also a freer tongue. There are some things I can't say as UNESCO that perhaps I'll be able to say in the future. Not that I feel incredibly constrained, because UNESCO is actually a surprisingly flexible organization in this regard. There are some red lines, but not really any relevant to this particular discussion. In closing, I would really like to echo the thanks of Garry, Carlos, and Yuri to all participants for a really very interesting discussion. I think the attempt to really develop hard-edged mathematical methodologies to approach the question of how the future might be transformed is incredibly valuable. It's very easy in the social and human sciences to fall into vagueness through lack of methodological rigor, and partly because it's just easier. If you don't have rigorous ideas, then just throw out something vague and it'll probably sound okay. But at some point, we do have to come up against the challenge of actually using serious methodologically informed thinking from disciplines such as mathematics and physics as well, of course. So the emphasis on phase diagrams and on phase transitions in the work presented to us comes from thermodynamics, of course, as a way of sharpening our thinking and giving it a harder edge. And in that respect, I think the thermodynamic imagery is extremely telling. And I would just close with that. What really struck me in much of this discussion is the traditional arguments about transformations going back to the 18th century and even before were always arguments that could assume a certain number of boundary conditions, an outside, a framework within which certain questions were raised. And of course, what's striking about our contemporary dilemmas and our future developments is that there's no more outside. Human nature is a technological accomplishment and may be changed by technology. The environment is ours to manage. We've shown we can destroy it. The challenge is to use the same level of capacity to make a positive difference to it. Even the planet is now, at least in our imagination, no longer the limit of our ambition, since the question of space, which I was enthusiastically interested in as a child and teenager in the 1970s, is now again coming back to our horizon. So there's no outside anymore. For better, for worse. That makes, among other things, the system dynamics much more difficult to analyze. And this is basically a mathematical problem. If you have clear boundaries, then those boundaries impose conditions on your equations, which allow you typically to find reasonable approximations to the solutions. If you have no boundaries, then it's often much more difficult to solve the equations. The second point with which I would close, which is very closely connected to the first, is that all of these issues are imagined even before they happen. This is the case in particular of technology, of course. We're already talking of building generalized artificial intelligence and robots that will surpass us in powers and competence. We are talking, or at least some people are talking, about abolishing death. None of these things are possible as of today. Some of them are perhaps not even conceptually coherent, but they are already imaginaries, and they're already very well-funded research projects, because imagination drives the current wave of capitalism, which means that everything that happens over the next 30 to 50 years will happen in part because of the unintended consequences of imaginative projections into the future, which is both fascinating and frightening, of course, because some of those imaginative projections are very strange. And they can, of course, in the worst case scenario, just be the imaginative projections of a madman, as many science fiction novels and films have shown. And the third thing and final thing, I think I said the second was the final one, but actually the third will be the final one, is my very strong agreement with Gary's point that expect the unexpected. In other words, of course, we can map out possibilities, but the idea that we can predict is a delusion, born of a certain idea of command and control that we need actually to get rid of, which is one part of our imaginary, which is problematic. Many of the most important things, maybe not in the next 5 years, but certainly over a period of 30 plus years, 30, 50, 100 years, will be things that have happened because of rather low probability events occurring cumulatively. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just how things have happened in the past. It will continue to happen that way. But the difference is that we have a level of reflexivity about this challenge that's probably much higher than it used to be, which means that we are the humans who are called upon to think not about mastery, but about surfing waves, with all that entails of complexity and uncertainty, not knowing when the wave will come, not knowing exactly how to keep a dynamic balance on it, not being sure exactly where the wave will take us. And of course, there's no shore on this particular surfing exercise. But at the same time, we have no choice, first, because otherwise you drown or you're eaten by sharks. Secondly, it's fun. And being human is about finding things that are fun and doing them, including intellectual speculation. And third, if we do it well, we might actually learn to do it better and perhaps leverage ourselves up into something higher. I'm not sure the metaphor is a particularly good one. I just improvised it, surfing my own wave of end of meeting, low blood sugar probably. But at least it reminds us that the challenge is not predict, command, control. If we set that as the challenge, then we will fail. And in failing, we will probably do a lot of damage. The challenge is something else. Carlos also said it in slightly different words. So let me close with that. Thank you very much. And I look forward to engaging with you again on a future event of this kind under the aegis of MOST. I hope so very much. And at the invitation of the Faculty of Global Processes at Lomonosov State University in Moscow. Thank you very much, and good night for those in my time zone, and whatever other greeting is appropriate to your time zone if you're elsewhere on the globe. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you,
everybody. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.